All right, so we're talking about Sour Patch Kids Oreos. And we pay
What's your favorite snack? Like I never really even asked people this.
my favorite snack is, it's a hard you're asking all the hard questions. This is my podcast. But I would say if I'm in a savory mood, then I want like, and you know what? As soon as I say it, I'm gonna regret because I'm gonna have something else I want too. But I'm gonna say, give me the kettle like cooked jalapeno chips. Uh,
Hey.
that's what I want. Okay, Papa wants that. And then I would say, if I want something sweet, honestly, like give me a double stuffed Oreo. Right? If we're talking like very simple, very sweet, let me split the two. Let me eat the cream and then the cookie. I don't know why I separated. You don't need to. It's they do the same thing. I eat the fucking cookie anyways, but I just switch the order in which it hits my mouth. That's me. I have probably a way too deep of an answer for that. I just, what is your snacks?
It's funny you mentioned Oreos because there's like, so we'll have it in the house and I'll enjoy it, but
Yep.
I know when I eat too much because my face will show it, I will break out. I don't know what it is about
Oh.
Oreos, but when my wife's just like, "Have you been eating Oreos?" and it's like, "No."
No. Why do you look like you're 13 then, buddy?
Exactly.
And where did these zits
Oh,
come from? This acne cream you just purchased? That's
it's
hilarious.
too dang good. And have you heard about the Ninja Creamy? I've been playing around with that
Yeah, dude, I
all
got the
week,
creamy.
man.
Oh yeah. You
What's your
creaming?
favorite concoction for that?
I honestly, the one of my favorite one I made was the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup one. So I did like a peanut butter ice cream base, and then
Uh-huh.
I put in like Trader Joe's like mini Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, and you swirl that bastard around, then you do a little mix in toppings with it, and that was like I was like, this is Ben and Jerry's, except 50 plus grams of protein. So it was beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy.
I feel
Orgasmic.
superior when I'm eating those.
That's
I'm looking around. This is better.
You will bow to me as I eat this creamy. Instant God complex.
Yeah.
So is that your snack right now? Is that what you're telling me?
Oh man, I am a ice cream fanatic. So the second I
Mm,
saw this creamy, I was like, okay, let me fight off the impulse buy. Let me just really
yeah.
think about it. And then I pulled the trigger, and I'm never going back.
It's true. You don't go back. If you do, you're always looking back. The Do you have a specific Ben and Jerry's flavor that you love?
You know, I think people rave about fish food, and
Mhm.
I think that's like a chocolate base.
Mhm.
I'm a vanilla based type of guy.
Yes,
I
preach,
just
preach.
like it just when it's too chocolatey, it's just like I can't decipher the different layers of chocolate. But if it's vanilla, I can
Mhm.
taste everything else, right? I guess
Mhm.
where that's where when you call somebody vanilla, that makes a lot of sense now. But it's all coming
My
to me now.
mind's gone to the gutters. Go on.
Uh, but I think at the end of the day, like you can't mess up cookies and cream. You can't mess
Mm,
up salted caramel. And I am the type of guy where it's like, all right, if I'm gonna buy ice cream, like I
mhm.
don't want to mess this up because I'm
Yeah.
not gonna power through an ice cream I don't want. Well, maybe I
Hmm.
will, but still.
Right, right. I I respect that because you stick to the essentials, right? But I have to
Yes.
go with I don't know if you've had it, the Ben and Jerry's Chubby Hubby, which is a vanilla malted vanilla ice cream base with swirls of hot fudge with chocolate covered pretzels filled with peanut butter. And I believe it also has like peanut butter swirls. And my friend,
Man.
it is orgasmic. It is like they load it with all the chunks and all that stuff, and it is just amazing. It is so good. That is my like, how you have like snacks in the house where you're just like, if this is here, it's destroyed. That is my I will destroy you in one sitting snack.
1000%. I'm not like super on like when it comes to my calories, I mean, with my current goal, I don't have a weight loss or weight gain goal right now, so it's just kind of maintenance. So I'll look at that ice cream and be like, you know what? Like I haven't really eaten a lot recently, so like I
Right.
can power through this and it's
Right.
gonna be a net neutral.
1000%. And we love a net neutral. So we know your ice cream preference. Why don't you tell the people a little bit maybe who you are?
Maybe that's where we should have started to begin
Let's
with,
go
but
there. No, screw it.
the quick elevator pitch here is my name is Dr. Brandon Parker. I am was a strength and conditioning coach, still kind of am, but I'm
Mm,
also a practicing practitioner as a chiropractor. And I was in the private sector working with professional athletes, and that was great. But waking up at 5 a.m. and finishing at 9 p.m. was
mm,
for the birds. And I decided to progress my career into healthcare, where now I'm just focusing on helping people move their best, especially when they have an injury. And then on top of that, we know in order to move your best, nutrition has to be a part of that. And also the mindset thing, which you and I talked about at length on my
mm.
podcast, where I feel like if you don't have the mindset, everything that you do is probably just going to like slide back to like square one again, you know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's cool that you have this passion for helping people move better, right? Where did let's dive in that a little bit because I'm very curious. Where did that passion like originate from? Like what's your X-Men origins like story with that?
It started off with a lot of people kind of writing themselves off at a certain age. It was like,
Mm,
I can't run. I'm 40. And it's like, what? I see 40-year-olds all the time doing great. And I started to see how people were kind of writing themselves off because of like an old injury.
mm,
And just to get people moving, like for example, like a common issue I hear all the time is their knees. And I'm noticing that their quad and hamstring development is practically non-existent. So it's like, okay, so you have literally nothing supporting the joint that's symptomatic. What if we
mm,
start just improving the function of the knee? Let's see what happens. And lo and behold, they don't have the aches and pains that they used to have. And
mm,
I saw such a because I went from a performance enhancer to making sure that people stayed on the field as long as possible to shifting into this general population. So I felt like I had a different lens. And I felt like when I helped the professionals, they were grateful. But like when I helped Gen Pop, like it changed their life. They're like, I'm hanging
mm,
out with my grandkids. I'm hanging out with my kids again. And I felt like I just had much more of an impact there. And that's why I started to
mm.
gravitate towards that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I find that fascinating because I love sports. Like I think sports are like the coolest thing. And then, like I think working with athletes is it's such a like you said, such a different population. What would you say, what are some positives that you pulled from that experience? What are maybe some negatives? And
Mhm.
how would you describe the difference in treatment between an athlete versus like a Gen Pop person?
Yeah, yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is when you're treating and training, well, I would say grand scheme, principles remain the same, right? We're
Mm,
humans. We all respond in a certain way, but the stress side of things is vastly different.
mm,
You have a athlete who their job in the off season is very controlled. They wake up, they train, they recover, rinse and repeat until it's season again. So
mm,
they can really take on a lot of stress in the gym because their external stress is pretty much minimal.
mm,
Whereas when you get a typical Gen Popper who is stressed at work, their family maybe is all sick, they have to somehow get dinner on the table, meet a work deadline, all that external stress, you
mm,
start to realize that they can't handle as much stress as they once could.
mm,
Therefore, you have to modify your training so you're not just trying to get blood from a stone, if you will. Like you have to make sure like what's the minimal effective dose so you don't get injured, right?
mm,
So that's the first big thing. But another thing that I noticed is Gen Pop loves to train like athletes. They
mm.
like to feel like they are moving and performing their best. And I think that a lens shift for me was just because it's not a prototypical sport, it doesn't mean that they're not performing, right?
Right.
Like if I am a landscaper, like I have to perform. That's a very physical job. Like I have to be in awkward positions all day, picking up heavy equipment and make sure that I don't have the sun beam down on me to a point where I have a heat stroke, right? So like
Hmm.
there's so many different facets where I realize that if you zoom out far enough, there's not a large difference, but a huge takeaway was just the gen poppers are just walking through fire, whereas professional athletes, like they do go through some stress, but it's all controlled and it's easier to navigate that, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a fellow gem popper, I think it is interesting to think of stress coming in different forms, like life just smacking you right in the face in certain ways, or like you even mentioned, like the very physical stress that, I mean, even like a corporate warrior who's sitting at their desk most of the day, right? Like that's a different kind of stress as well, right? So I think
Sure.
it is very interesting to think of Gen Pop like we are athletes in our own way, right? It's just like the sport that we play is a financial advisor or a, like you said, a landscaper or a chiropractor, right? Even like chiropractors need some loving too, right? So I think that is such an interesting concept for that. What would you say, what goes into the, because you mentioned how it's hard for people to sort of translate back into like normalcy after an injury, right? What goes into like the mindset work behind initiating or integrating somebody back into like their normal life post injury?
That is an absolute rabbit hole, and I
Ooh,
love to
let us
talk about
dive.
this. So, actually, I'll share a quick story that it blew my mind, and it's what sent me down this rabbit hole of reading more and more about it. It
Mm,
was I was in clinic as a student, and I had a
mm,
22-year-old cheerleader come in, and she had excruciating lower back pain, like
mm,
it's 12 out of 10 pain. If they bent over, they felt like their spine would explode type
right.
situation, and I go ahead and I look at the MRI, I look at the X-rays, and this is like the first time ever that I've seen literally nothing on either of them. And of course, the radiologist also agreed, where there's like, this is a clean slate spine. I don't know why she's in pain, but that is looking at it through a lens that is what we call just a structural
Mm,
lens. Like,
yeah.
and then it started to shine a light on, okay, if there's nothing wrong structurally, what could be going on from the psychosomatic standpoint?
Mm,
Um, and as I start to talk to her more and more, her stress was through the roof because she was transitioning jobs. She was out on her own, so she had no clue how she's going to pay rent.
mhm,
And then on top of that, a previous doctor back when she was younger said that her lower spine is super fragile and one wrong move can cause catastrophic injury.
mm,
So when she sprained her lower back that caused this whole thing, would actually turn, let's say, a 4 out of 10 pain into a 12 out of 10 pain was what she was experiencing between the ears. She
wow.
thought she did catastrophic damage to her spine and it was going to be um, like unable to be repaired. So, as I educated her and I showed her the MRI, I showed her the x-rays, I said, let's go ahead and just try to find an exercise that fits your capabilities and it doesn't scare you.
Hmm.
And I said, do you think it's fair to say that at some point you're going to have to tie your shoes? She's like,
Mm.
yeah, it's fair. It's like, okay, try to reach for your toes right now. And when you feel like it's too much flexion in the spine, stop right there and breathe and see if the pain changes. And we would do that. She would get lower and lower. And this would take quite a bit of sessions. Like I would never force it. And then by the third session, when she touched her toes, and then we started to implement some lower back exercises and she felt confident, pain went away
Wow.
completely. And just that just shows you how we perceive what's going on is
Mm,
going to have a much larger impact than what we previously thought. Whereas you look at some people with MRIs, disc bulges, rotator cuff tears, they have no clue, asymptomatic.
mm.
So it goes both ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so interesting how, because it's almost like when we talk about like pain threshold, right? Like some people have a very high tolerance, right? Where it's
Mhm.
just like they can work through the pain, right? Which might not be a good thing, but they can, right? Versus like you
Mhm.
mentioned, where someone else might heighten their pain based on anxiety or predicting a negative outcome or anything like that. How does somebody, I guess, how do you assess that on your own? Like, how do you assess if it's like I'm actually fucked up or this is mostly in my head, right? Or I'm imagining the pain to be a lot worse than it is.
That's a phenomenal question because that's usually where the conversation will naturally go.
Mm,
And it does come back to what we were having, the conversation we were having back on my podcast, where
mm-hmm,
it does come down to having a conversation and
mm,
first screening for what we call red flags. And
mm,
anybody that has a solid understanding of how the body works could find these red flags because they
yeah.
do stick out like a sore thumb. Where
Mm,
if somebody says like, "Oh, like," if they use phrases like my disc are super fragile, they'll explode, right? Or this could be like
mm,
my shoulder it's been destroyed for years, there's no way that
right.
it's ever going to get better. When you start to hear their language that they're using, and it's basically a closed mindset where they
Yeah.
don't think there's ever a chance of coming back,
Mm,
you have to address that head on. Because if you don't, the first moment that you get what we call flare up, which will happen, they're just going to shut down. Because
mm,
what happens when you start to put tension on a muscle? It gets stronger, right? But what happens when we start to put tension on a muscle that's currently injured? Pain will go up temporarily. That's to be expected. But if you have this mindset of this is it, I can't get better. This is the end all be all. Like then you are stuck in this repetitive cycle of trying to train, can't train, and then get a little bit more, or I should say less confident in yourself to a point where you just don't try anymore. But
mm,
to answer your question directly, it does come down to just test and retest. Like, okay, my shoulder hurts. Can I press in front of me? Yes. Awesome. So that means I can just find some type of variation that I can press with. Can I pull horizontally? Yes or no? Well, I feel a little bit of pain when I pull and my elbow's far away from my body. What if
mm,
I were to modify that? Bring that elbow closer so I can take
mm,
pressure off my rotator cuff.
mm.
That gives us the green light to train the rotator cuff,
Yeah.
but not in a way that feels dangerous or painful. But it comes down to just testing the shoulder, what it can do, what it can't do, and
Mm,
modifying and see how it can keep on moving. Does that make
right.
sense?
No, it makes complete sense. And I think it is sort of like kind of like we did talk about in your podcast. It's like a check engine light, right? Where it's just like I need to constantly assess if what basically you're saying like what can I do and can I how well can I do that? What can I not do at the moment? And what do I need to apply? Is it more time? Is it more rest? Is it like you meant like prescribed exercises, things like that that will begin to make me feel better? But also I like what you said because it's very similar to like someone who's on a weight loss journey where most people have the expectation that there won't be any setbacks, that they're not going to fall off track or anything like that. It sounds very similar to this case where you need to expect flare-ups and setbacks through your rehabilitation journey. Otherwise, you're going to think you fucked up or something's wrong or it's never going to get better.
1000%. And that's kind of where I landed in the world of being a coach again. Because
Mm,
as I was doing the rehab stuff in person, you had to start taking everything in for account. And it's just like, well, if you have, let's say, 30 pounds of excess body fat, like you
mm,
are going to be in an inflamed state. If you are in an inflamed state and you have an injury, that's salt on the wounds,
mm,
right? So like it is a complex issue. And this is why, like, when I'm working with personal trainers that are in my clinic or I'm able to talk to you, I
mm,
always try to educate on exercise modification and how to implement that across the board because rehab and exercise modification could be used interchangeably. If you
mm,
can't squat a full squat, but you can squat down to a chair, okay, you took out the range of motion. That is rehab. That's also exercise modification.
mm.
I do have a question for you because
Oh, go
I've
for
been
it.
I've been watching your stories, and
Yeah.
you've been working with that badass guy named Warren.
Warren.
Um, So I'm assuming there's a lot of exercise modification in that, right?
Yeah. So Warren came to me with a broken hip. So
No
he
shit.
had fell, he had broken his hip, and like he's got like the cool. It's I don't know if you know who Nicholas Sparks is, but basically like if you've seen the Notebook movie or like read any of those like romantic love stories, right? So he broke his hip, and at the same time, his wife had got admitted to a mental care unit because she had Alzheimer's, right?
Oh,
So instead of going direct, like he got his surgery the same day he broke his hip, instead of going directly to rehab, he spent like the next 2 weeks with her as she went into this place. So he's like not even rehabbing. He's like, so like doing a lot of long-term damage in terms of not moving and all these other things, right? So by the time he came to me, he was bound to a scooter, right? So he couldn't walk, he couldn't like use a cane, he couldn't use a four walker, a two-wheel walker. So we really had to start from like the bottom up, right?
yeah,
To the point where it's just like, okay, can we do some leg extensions from your scooter? Can we do like some like lateral hip movement or things like that? Would basically just like how can we get you moving in some ways? And also the other thing that I love about Warren is he's so goal oriented, right?
yeah,
So like I don't even have to put the goals in his head. He's already like, well, my goal is to walk at a football game at the end of the year. I'm just like, okay, all right, let's do it. So
right on.
this is what it's gonna take and what it goes from there. So like so we went from like starting like very basic like body weight things to now doing like so now he does like 120 pounds on the leg press. Like he does like we do he's like uses his cane now to walk, right? Like he's able to walk with like maybe like a rail near him and all this. We play golf on Fridays, right? We go to the putting greens and he's able to like stand on his own, play golf. So like that, so to your question, it's like it really is like you go where you're at and then you build from there,
Yeah,
right? And that is so true. And I like that you connected that because it is like you have to be stubborn in a way, right? When it comes to like rehab, right? Like you can't, like maybe there's something you might not be able to do, but like who's to say you can't at the same time,
right.
right?
1,000%. And I think that something that we had to highlight here is the
Mm-hmm.
fact that if we were to look at a snapshot of your exercise selections for Warren, and
Mm-hmm.
you said, like, okay, we did some leg extensions from the scooter, we did some lateral hip raises, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In a snapshot, we'd probably be like, that's never going to get him to walk. But that is
Mm-hmm.
one period of time where he's currently at. And
Right.
as we know it, if the body is given a resistance that it can adapt to and you're
Mm-hmm.
consistent enough, it will, and it will get
Right.
stronger. And that's when you up regulate the tension and stress so you can
Mm-hmm.
adapt again. And
Yeah.
um, I guess the big thing that I always like to drive home is like small things really do matter. And it can be said for habits, it could be said for most behaviors as well.
Yeah. And I think that is so, and it could be done at any like Warren's 90 years old, right? So I think that's the cool thing. I'm sure you get this all the time too with your clients and your patients is you think especially at our age, right? Like we have our youth, right? And I think most people think as we get older like you become decrepit and you just fall apart. And sure, like some things you might not be sprinting when you're 90 years old, right? But like if you're moving, if you have an injury, like you could still work through these things and be better on the other side of it, right? So I think that's been like the biggest lesson I've learned from him is just like be a stubborn asshole and just fucking keep working and keep setting goals. Like it doesn't stop at any age, right? Especially that you're
Yeah.
90, like keep moving, keep showing up and consistency, right? Like I'm sure you could probably attest like consistency is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I think also like the consistency is going to play a huge role. And I'm actually curious. I mean, you told me that Warren is very goal oriented. Now, did
Hmm.
he ever set a goal that you looked at him and was like, let's bring it down a notch?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Currently, dude. Yeah, because I remember one day because like he warms up on like a stationary bike just to get some cardio in and stuff like that. And I the other day, it was like a couple weeks ago, he's like, I'd like to go on the treadmill now. And I'm like, okay. So what I did with him instead was like, well, let's see where you're at walking wise first, right? So I just kind of had him walking by a railing and like, he kind of like missed a step or two. And then I had him do like where maybe I put like a small yoga block in front of him. I'm like, all right, I want you to drive that knee up, step over this block, bring the other leg over. And he had some difficulty with it. So I was like, listen, this is a great goal to have, and like that's long-term goal. I go, but we need to make sure that you're in a safe position with training at all times so that we don't regress. Right. So that allowed him to see without me saying no, it allowed him to see through his current physical abilities and that those exercise selections that like, hey, like you're not there yet, but we can get there, and these are the steps we need to take to go there, right? And I even told him like, hey, we can even get you in the pool before we get you into like some cardio work and stuff like that, so you can walk and all that stuff. So he was just like, and when I did that, it's still like his goal, but he's just like, I got some work to do, right? And that's like, again,
Yeah.
it kind of adds fuel to the fire without telling someone, no, you can't do this.
I think what you just did was like a chef's kiss, considering
Mm,
that like some trainers will be they look like the opposition when they say no, even if they mean correct, like they mean well, right?
mm-hmm,
But because you probably looked at Warren's current state and you're like, I don't know, but you still gave him the chance,
mm-hmm,
right? And when, like you said, when they had the opportunity to see themselves and then they see what they need to work on, I think that
mm,
creates such a awesome learning environment.
mm,
Um, Speaking about the pool, so I had a client just recently. So she was coming in to see me because she was
mm,
in a wheelchair.
mm,
Because so she's only like 34, 30, yeah, 34 years old. Got in a car accident and fractured
mm,
her tibia, which is the shin bone, and she couldn't put any pressure on the left leg for about 5 months.
mm,
In that time, she actually tore her right meniscus, and now she's trying to rehab the right meniscus. So she comes to see me. We start to work with her. We get her from the wheelchair to the crutches within about 3 months span.
mm.
We're moving the right direction. And then she accidentally tears her ankle, like
Oh,
the outside of her ankle. So
mm-hmm.
she had three substantial injuries in the last
Right.
year and a half. And the one thing, just to pay credence to what we're talking about, is like she is now making amazing progress, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because we got her in the pool where she can walk pain free and fear
Mm-hmm.
free,
Yeah.
and she's starting to reestablish that. But I guess another reason why I had to bring that up is like, out of all the people in this world that we know of could make an excuse to kind of just throw in the towel, it could have been her, but she just
Mm-hmm.
kept such a good mindset, which I think
Mm,
I think you would agree. Like, having a good mindset is probably going to be one of the most important things to have,
mm-hmm.
regardless of the journey, you know?
Yeah, that's so true. Because I coming from my own injury history, like I tore my shoulder labrum playing
Okay, yeah.
football in high school my senior year, and I remember that being a very like lonely, dark time because it's I think, and we talked about this on your podcast, but you're only able in those times when you like have these low lows to process the things you can't do, right? Or what you're missing out on. Or like for me, it was like I can't finish my senior year playing this sport because I'm in a sling and I'm waiting for surgery, right? So it's like so you're only able to process what you're losing out on, and then you're also like during that rehab process time, you're like like you probably hear this, you probably heard this from your athletes all the time too, I'm sure, when they're rehabbing through exercise, it is a grueling, lonely journey because they're not with the team, right? They're not with their
Yep.
friends. Like they are in like the rehab, doing all the hard, grueling work, going through the pain, wondering if they'll ever play again, or same thing with your client. Like she had every reason to sulk. And maybe she allowed herself that at times, but she had every reason to throw in the towel because she had three major injuries while trying to come
Yep.
back from one at a time. So yeah, dude, I think mindset is absolutely everything. Is there anything you coach your clients on like during that time specifically to help like bring their spirits up and kind of like give them that hope to keep going?
Yeah, yeah. Couple things. I also tore my labrum in football my junior year, and I
Twins.
was yeah, dude, I was super. Was it your right shoulder?
Mine was my left.
Ah, so we just
We could
we
trade
can
though.
combine together and make a really terrible
That's
shoulder.
right. Give me a
uh,
good one.
I I uh when I tore my shoulder, I refused to get the surgery until I was like, I'm playing next year. There's no way. But it was to the point where it was dislocating almost every play.
Yeah, man.
I have a highlight tape of like I don't it's not a montage of me doing just this, but I
Yeah.
have multiple plays where I'm relocating my shoulder and
Yeah.
then like tackling somebody.
Dude,
It's rough,
I
man.
relate to that because I had like I remember this because when I tore it, obviously it's dislocated. You go in the next day, you get like the X-rays, the MRIs, all that stuff. And I was just like, well, I'm gonna try to finish out my season, right? So I did like rehab for like 4 weeks in PT. And I remember they gave me this like bionicle like
The
contraption that I would,
subluxation
yeah,
brace.
dude, that I would have to wear uh during like when I was playing, just so my shit wouldn't dislocate. But it was like the clunkiest shit ever, dude.
Yeah,
And
you
like,
felt like a robot.
oh, absolute robot. And I think what my coaches did this on purpose is they were just like they just didn't play me until like the literally last game when it was like senior night because they're just like, this is a kid who we don't need to do irreparable damage to. It's not the NFL,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and let's just like let this kid rehab because I had like surgery scheduled for like the day after the season ended.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, because like I said, I was rehabbing all this stuff, but like, dude, it was like, and I remember that being like dark times. I remember taking like ephedrine and things like that, and like like
Yeah.
ibuprofen like crazy just to sleep through the night. Like I think that's the stuff people don't really talk about a lot when it comes to injuries and how people try to navigate through them is like the things you're willing to do to numb
Yeah.
the mental and physical pain just to
Mhm.
feel normal and like contribute again.
You bring up a very good point. I took this from my own pain experience and then also what I see with my clients where it's the idea of like for somebody that's listening, think about when you are like dog sick, like super sick. You have the flu, right?
Mm,
Like and like you're on the couch, you're like shaking, you got Kleenex everywhere. And imagine somebody coming up to you and say, hey, you should be eating right. You should be eating the best food possible.
hmm
And then you kind of look at them like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't feel like doing anything. And that's
mm,
the same idea when you're in pain, right? Like you should be doing XYZ to improve your health, but the
right.
reason why you're not doing it is because the current hurdle that you have to overcome is much higher than what other people are perceiving. And
Mm,
um, to circle back to your question about how do we prime our clients to kind of get prepared for this journey of some ebbs and flows is, well, there's a couple things. You have to set expectations very thoroughly. Like, this is what you can expect.
mm,
And then on top of that, you have to have objective measures, whether it be a goal, whether it be, hey, how strong are you in this certain range of motion, how much range of motion you have. Those are all super important because when you get hurt, the only thing that's activated in your brain is your emotional side of the brain. You don't care about
mm,
any logic at that given time. You can just basically say that all this was for nothing. I didn't get any progress. And there you are with, let's say, 30 degrees more range of motion. You're stronger. You haven't been injured in a very long time, but you don't
yeah,
think that way when you're in pain, right?
right,
Or back to like we were talking about in my podcast is like when you step on that scale and it solicits an emotional response like you don't think about the journey, you don't think about the objective side, you just go,
right.
oh, this is all for nothing.
hmm That's so true. And I think that is such a good point. No matter what goal or endeavor you are beginning, it is, I mean, dude, that's everything. If you need to really sit down and understand like what do I need to expect from this journey,
Yeah.
right? Because when we talked about, but like if you aren't expecting these setbacks or going off track or like the frustrations that come with it and all these other things, then you're just setting yourself up to repeat the same patterns over and over and over again, right? So it's so interesting to see in your field as well, or like mine might be like people with nutrition or like weight loss and things like that. But yours is like people who are like grinding through these injuries and all these other things that maybe they've and just like weight loss, maybe they've struggled with for years.
Exactly. Exactly. You're fighting these narratives that are so deep rooted inside their own
Mm,
psyche that you have to take your line from it, peel it back like layers, right? Like if
mm-hmm,
they're not ready for you to confront them on their false narrative, whether it be through fat loss, whether it be like some trauma, whether it be their belief of their own body,
mm-hmm,
you're not going to be able to plant that seed. And in my younger years of being in practice, I made the massive of mistake trying to, it was all in good heart, like good spirits, where I was just like, the way you're thinking isn't in line with what's actually happening. In fact, like you're stronger than what you are and you should be
mm-hmm.
confident. They don't want to hear that. In fact, I
Right.
lost clients because of it, you know,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
because I looked like the guy that was shrugging off their concern more so than what I was trying to be was being supportive. So
mm.
there's a time and place, right?
Yeah. So they were like, Doc, I need that bedside manner right now instead of the the you can do's.
Right.
What
Rub some
what
dirt in it.
exactly? In this surgical wound, I want you to rub some dirt in it. The My question for you is because I love when like medical professionals especially have a much more holistic approach to how they treat somebody, right? For you, in your case, right? Like obviously you've talked about, the rehab process and the exercise selection and having objective measures to really see if someone's making progress. What was like your instance into maybe your own journey for mental health? Because you speak as if not just somebody who does it with their clients, but somebody who's done it on their own.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So with my shoulder, with my knee, with all these, I have a lot of injuries, man. Broke my clavicle.
Mhm.
All through just like I broke my clavicle climbing a tree. That's not impressive, but it happened. I mean, what was your question again?
My question for you is because you have, and first off, I could see you climbing a tree, and I feel like your mom be like, "Brandon, get down from that tree." But my question for you is because you speak as if you've been through your own mental health journey, right? So
Yeah.
what kind of on your end sort of kick-started that own insight and be like, I need to take a deeper look under my hood to see what's going on.
Now I understand your question. Yeah. You know, maybe it was just the constant, I would check myself around, and then I guess this could be seen in different ways. I would look around and I
Mm,
would notice that, like, why am I so anxious? Why am I so stressed? Why am I the only one acting like the roof's on fire? And then
mm,
everyone else kind of just like coasting,
mm-hmm,
And I realized at first I made the inkling, or I had the thought that I was just like, I'm just a high achiever. I just care more. I'm a perfectionist, right?
mm-hmm,
And then as the years went on, and like when you look at the objective data, it's like, oh, these people are doing basically the same as me, but I'm the one that's literally like chronically stressed 24/7. I realized that I had some false beliefs that I had to smash in order for my own personal health. Because for as us being somebody that guides other people through this journey,
mm,
it felt very hypocritical for
yeah.
me to not look underneath my own hood. So like I think it was just maybe it was like the situation was attacking my ego from different angles,
Mm,
but I realized that in order for me to be the best coach, best father, best husband, I need to have an emotional intelligence that I do not have right now.
mm,
And I think that sitting down and talking about it with the professionals is very important. Um, but I also found that it was hard for me to open up to them.
mm,
So what I've been doing for myself as a recent, in conjunction of talking with somebody,
mm-hmm,
is just sitting or walking with no distraction, because our brain loves that, and just
mm-hmm,
asking questions. And I think that you hit on this as well. It's just like it's such a simple question, but it's ambiguous and it's perfect because it really gets you to go deeper and deeper. It's just ask yourself why.
mm,
And the first like five layers of that answer, it's gonna be superficial. You know how to avoid the thing you don't want to talk about.
right.
And then when you get to like layer 6, layer 7, then you're starting to get into real stuff. And
Yeah.
then you actually can start making some changes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to that credit, it's so funny because I've been going to therapy since 2017. So that's a long fucking time. But it's funny because there's still stuff that, or at least there was a year ago. I remember I had like a rock bottom moment in life with like relationships and all these things. And, I just remember having this conversation with my therapist, and I finally told her something that I just never told her, uh, like in all our years of therapy. And she's like, "Oh," she's like, "I haven't heard this from you before. Why, like in all the years of therapy, like sort of like, and she wasn't shaming. She was just like, why? What makes you bring that up right now, or why didn't you bring it up before?" And I was like, I think just because I felt shame in bringing it up, right? So even though, and I think, because we talk about this all the time and therapy and mental health and stuff like that, but like people can go to therapy for years and not talk about what they need to talk about,
Yep.
right? And I think that's the scary shit, right? Because that's literally like it's like you are going and you're addressing the superficial stuff that you think, and maybe you're saying the things you want your therapist to hear, and what you think that you want them to hear and stuff like that. But if you're not really taking a moment to be like, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why am I afraid to speak up? Kind of like you said, like do the ogre, Shrek ogre layers, right? you you're missing out on the actual experience of moving forward and creating this version of you that you say you want, but you're afraid of going where you actually want to go. And like when you said that, I relate to that wholeheartedly because like, obviously I've had hard talks and conversation. You have breakthroughs here and there, but like 4 or 5 years, 6 years down the line, I told my therapist something that she was like, "Oh, didn't know this was a thing. Like, let's work through this." And then since then, it's just like, fuck. It's like, okay, it's like, let's work through it. But when you, and I'm sure you can attest to this, but wait, like when you, and that's vulnerability. It's like when you can finally reveal yourself and reveal everything that you feel shame or guilt around, that's sort of when you're able to sort of step forward into the person that you want to be.
I was going to ask you a question because I always think about maybe it's the podcast host brain going on, but
Hmm.
it's like if somebody's listening to this, what questions would they be asking? And you kind of hit on it there at the end. It's just because if somebody were to ask me, like, how do you know you're talking about the real stuff? Like, how do you know that you're there talking about the things that really are going to move the needle? I I would almost have like a cop out answer. It's like, oh, you just know, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
but
yeah,
but
yeah.
but I think you said it a little bit more objectively here, where it's just like, are you feeling defenseless, vulnerable? Like, do you feel like you're really? I think it's almost uncomfortable to say, and I
Hmm.
think that's something you have to lean into. But if I were to ask you that question, how
Hmm.
would you answer it? Like, how do you know you're talking about the real stuff?
The very first thing that comes to mind is literally like if I had like a ball, right? And I was holding onto this ball so tight, and you were trying to get this ball from me, and I was just
Yeah.
resisting and fighting it the whole time so that you couldn't get it and see what I had. That's how I would describe it. Is like it's
Yeah.
this constant defense to protect this thing that you don't want anybody else to see or anybody else to have, right? So it's like this part of you where we all know we have this part of us that is like on constant defense, right? Like, I don't want you to see that real side of me. Like, what would you think? What would you do? How would you judge me, right? Like, that's what you're protecting. That's what you're hiding because you have this almost protector role of like, I am not letting you see this. I'm not letting you touch this, right? So that's how I would describe it. It's like if there's something deep down that you're really like resistant, like if someone touches on it a little bit and you instantly like avoid or pull away or switch subjects or like laugh out of humor, like you're coping things, right? Like that's what I would challenge you. Like that's what somebody's holding on to, and that's one way you could say it. Also, like somatically, right? Like think if I asked you like a question where you're just like that challenges you on something you're not talking about, like, and you instantly get like a lump in your throat, right? Like maybe it's someone you're grieving through and you haven't grieved through and you're avoiding that grieving and you get that lump in your throat because you're like, oh, I feel like I'm gonna cry, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna power through this or tough through this, right? You feel that lump or you feel that tightness in your chest. Or we all talk about butterflies, right? Like when you're nervous and you're excited and things like that. Like tuning in somatically into your body's physical reaction to something that is a mental external like poke. I think those are like two things that you can kind of start cueing in on to kind of just be like, what am I hiding? What am I protecting that I don't want anybody to see that feels like shame, guilt, or like fear of judgment, right? And also, like, what am I physically feeling when I'm
Yeah.
asked a certain question or asked to go deeper into something, right? Those are like the first two things that pop into my head.
Do you think that there's ever going to be a point where there isn't a part of you being on defense? Do you think there's people walking around that have completely fulfilled themselves? They're open to the world. They're free
Mm.
of shame, or do you think that's part of human nature?
Honestly, I think that's part of human nature, man. And I honestly I think it's okay, right?
Yeah,
Because I think if we really understand vulnerability, vulnerability isn't just being like, this is me, this is my life, like I want you to know everything about that's like that's not vulnerability, right? Like
yeah,
vulnerability is a choice to share yourself with somebody or a group of people because you know it will make you feel good, it make you come into your authentic self. It's not just telling everybody in the world about all your shit. Like I
right.
think in some ways we have to protect ourselves around certain people, right? It's just like I don't have to show myself to you if I don't
Yeah,
believe you are somebody worthy of seeing my true self, right? It doesn't mean I'm an asshole to you or I'm not a real person. It just means like I don't have to, right? It's my
right.
choice, right? So I think, and again, I think we all when we think of this mental work and this inner work, like we're like, oh, I have to be a monk by the end of this shit, right? Like I have to be Gandhi. It's like no, that you don't, and like even those people have their own issues and things that they battled, right? But it's like you have to and like you said, like define set expectation, like define like what you're going for, right? Because you don't have to be Mr. or Miss Vulnerable to the world. You just have to know and be okay with, am I okay with the person I'm showing up to be, with those I care about and those I work with, all these things. And if you know deep down you're not, then that's something you need to address, right?
Yeah,
But I don't think there's anything wrong with the human nature of defense or anything like that because we have it for a reason. I think there's something wrong when it's stopping you from coming into the person you want to be.
I love that. I The one thing that you hit on that I thought was really cool is, hold on, let me hit this.
Hmm.
It'll go. I have a really bunk camera here, but it's having being okay and being, because I noticed this is I did it to myself. I see other people go through it. They'll read a book about vulnerability. They'll read a book about personal development, and this book is has an author that has their idea of what that means to them,
Hmm.
right? And you're reading this book and you're like, all right, how do I achieve this with this person? And then they feel almost like anxious and lost because not only are they chasing somebody else's definition, but of course, the way most of these books are written, it's already vague as it is, right? And to circle back to what you're saying is like when you sit down and you objectively say, like, this will bring me happiness. This will bring me to a higher level of self where I want to be. I
Hmm.
think that's the answer. And that is your measuring stick. And you have to
Hmm.
be okay with that. And the
Hmm.
stuff that we work on here, rehab, personal development, vulnerability, fat loss, all these things, they all take time. And you have to just be okay with doing the work and
Hmm.
not seeing direct instant gratification, if you will.
Hmm.
And I think once people get over that and they only use their own measuring stick, they're going to make way more progress than if they read another book or,
Hmm.
do some self-help exercises
Yeah.
they read in that book and things like that, you
I
know?
mean, it's so true. I mean, you hear that all the time, like people get overwhelmed with information, right?
Yeah.
And that's something I've definitely encountered on my own mental health journey too, is like when you read so much and you're like, you should do this when you're on a first date, or you should do this with your partner to have better communication or understand. Like you just sometimes there's just too much, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you just need to take a step back and look at your toolbox and say, do I have too many tools? Are they stopping me from actually working on my issues? Right? Because you just get overwhelmed by it, right? Like I am a prime example of someone who's gotten overwhelmed by their own inner work. I just had therapy an hour ago, and her and I just talked about how she gave me this same comparison. She's like, you know how you tell people not to work out every day and that they need rest days? I was like, yeah. She's like, why aren't you doing that with your own mental health? Right? She's like,
Don't get it.
why do you think you need to journal every day, meditate every day, go to yoga? Like she's like, why are you trying to do these things every day? She goes, it's exhausting, right? And that's even when I told her, I go, when you say that, like it makes me want to cry by how exhausting it is, right? To constantly feel like you need to be working on yourself, fixing yourself. It's like, no, like be a fucking human, right? And
Yeah.
understand that you need breaks and you need rest and that, you're not gonna be perfect and you can't fix everything, right? So it's like, so I hear that wholeheartedly when you say that. It's how like when there is such a thing as too much, there is such a thing as like you're diving in way too deep and you don't need to go that far if that's like not what you need. And also like it's okay to move the goalposts sometimes, right? Like sometimes like the goals that I had, like mental health wise or like work wise or anything like that, they're not the same I have now, right? So
Yeah.
as you grow and develop, you slowly move the goalpost so that you have the next thing you're trying to accomplish, right? It doesn't mean you're constantly moving it because you need to appreciate the work you're doing and all that, but like you're always going to be slowly moving the goalpost away because we always have work to do, right? We're like
Yeah.
just because I've been in therapy for 7 years, I'm still in it because it's a constant, right? Like we are a
Yeah.
constant work, right? Just because someone finishes their rehab doesn't mean they go back to doing the same bozo shit that caused them the injury in the first place, right? Like you need to constantly work on your internal external hip rotation or like same with your shoulder. Like you need to constantly do these things so you don't go back to the same place.
Yeah. In I hope I'm not asking you a super vulnerable question here,
Go
but
for it.
I think that this would be interesting for those who are listening for
Hmm.
some takeaway. We always talk about objective measures with rehab. I want to do XYZ, get this
Yeah.
strong. Weight loss, I want to lose this amount of weight. Strength, how strong am I?
Hmm.
But what does an objective goal look like when it comes to mental health? I know it's going to be different
Hmm.
for the person, but what
Yeah.
could one of those look like?
For me, I mean, I'll speak for me personally. For me personally, it's kind of like you kind of look at it as if like you're periodizing like a workout program, right?
Okay.
So it's like my first periodization for mental health was navigating my anxiety and my depression, right? So it was like, why do I have this? How do I navigate it? What are the roots of it? Oh, turns out it's not just this instance of breaking up with an ex back in 2015. It's something I've had my whole life, and this is the roots of it. Okay, now that's revealed. Okay, here's tools to work on your anxiety, depression, things like that. Oh, like you lost somebody. Like this is my journey. You lost
Yeah.
your grandpa, you lost some friends, right? You have to process through that grief. How are you doing that? Are you coping with this and that? And like, oh, are these patterns that you've been using to avoid this, right? So like I'd say like goals for mental health, you kind of look at it in segments, right? Because that's life is, and that's literally like what my therapist was saying today. She's like, there's gonna be periods where you're bored as fucking life, and it's just like a flat line. There's gonna be periods where you're extremely happy, right? You found the person, it's wedding day, you're married, and it's amazing. Like I'm so excited for this part of my life. Then there's parts where you have like you go through the lows of it, right? You go through the fights and all the hard conversations. You have kids, you go through periods of no sleep, you go through periods of, trying not to put your shit on them, or you have an argument and like you're like, I didn't like the way I showed up there. So it's like you're gonna have these highs and lows of life. And I think like for me at least, like my goal is like one, getting a very good awareness of who I am, right? When I think self-awareness, like that's one of my biggest goals. Like let me be very self-aware so that I even if I feel misaligned in something, I know, or I have a better idea of where I can redirect, right? If I feel anxiety or something like that, I have tools to help me with that, or just know that, hey, this is gonna something you just have to sit with. You're going through a stressful time, give yourself some grace, right? When it comes to like conversations. Like that was another period for me is like, buddy, you need to have some hard conversations with people because you are not going to improve these relationships and like if you don't, and you are going to keep repeating these patterns, you're building resentment, it's giving make you anxious. It's like then you go through that period. It's like how to navigate and have difficult conversations with people, right? You go through periods of being vulnerable. Are you showing up as your real self? What does your real self look like? So it's like it's kind of like you mentioned when I asked you that first question, you're like, that's a rabbit hole. It's like it is mental
Yeah.
health is a rabbit hole. It's and I think that's the important part is like there doesn't have to be a specific goal. There's just specific things you're working through at specific times. And maybe you need more tools at one time. Maybe one point it's like pulling back more and make sure you're actually living and not just trying to like fix. So I would say for me, it's like my ultimate goals like find more moments of peace, right? And contentment. I'm not like I think, and I remember I said this once, and people were like, "What? You don't want to be happy?" Because I was like, I'm not trying to like be happy all the time. I'm trying to be at peace and find
Yeah.
contentment because happiness is a high and sadness, depression is a low, right? So I'm trying to have those flatline days. I'm trying to feel content and at peace at the end of each day, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like my goal is like, what do I need to do to feel peace at the end of every day?
It that pattern seems like for some reason it popped in my head is like heart rate variability. Like we
Mm,
want that high and that low when you're
hmm
looking at heart rate variability for health and recovery. And it's kind of the same idea for mental health, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to be able to hit that high point or that low point and get back to baseline because that's showing you that the body is robust and adaptable. And if
hmm
you're staying at a high, I think everyone can conceptualize this. Like if you're always at a high, you're going to be run down, right? And
hmm
in this definition or this analogy, same thing with being at the low, right? Yeah, that's really good, man. It's funny because I feel like every time we chat, and we don't have any type of script, but it always like it always polishes some diamonds, you know what I'm
Yeah, dude. And that's
saying?
honestly like that's my favorite conversation, man, is like there's no script. You're just it's curiosity, right? And that's why I appreciate
Yeah.
you asking these questions because it's just curiosity. It's like, oh, like tell me more about this or tell me more about you in this way. Like how did that affect you? Like what does that mean to you, right? And I think when you get away from superficial and start going into like the deeper layers, then that's really when you start to find those gems, right? That like that
Yeah.
you start uncovering those diamonds that you're like, oh, that sticks to me a lot. I have a question for you. All right, so I have two questions actually. The last question that I ask everybody on my podcast. All right, so the name of this podcast is called These Little Moments, right? And to go along with what we just talked about, there was a moment in my life. I was at Jordan Syatt's seminar, and everybody's being very vulnerable and sharing some deep things that they struggled with. And for me, I felt compelled to speak, and it was the first time I really told people like I struggle with my mental health, I struggle with anxiety, depression, all these things. And that was such a little moment for me that stands out because it really was a catalyst for me continuing to show up for myself and be vulnerable and do the more of the inner work. Uh, is there a moment or moments in your life that sort of sticks out to you that you're like, this has allowed me to show up as the person I am today?
Yeah. Something that comes to mind, and maybe I'll be kicking myself later that I'll probably have a better answer if I thought about it
Yeah.
more. But um, so this was about almost a year ago now. This is a day before my wedding. Did I ever tell you the story about my wife?
No, please go.
Oh, geez. All right, everyone buckle up. Okay. So, all right. So about a year ago, we're coming up on August. Um, my wife and I have been together since high school, and we just been putting off marriage because I was going to chiropractic school. She was doing her master's. We just kept putting it off and putting it off until um, I became a independent contractor as a chiropractor. So if you don't know what an independent contractor is, I don't get paid unless I see clients, and I'm brand new out of school. So if my marketing stinks, I'm not getting paid. So bills are coming in. I have a slow schedule. So there's stress right there that's going on. And I started to notice that I was getting like GI issues. I
Mm,
wasn't sleeping. I was getting panic attacks. And on top of that, my wife was also like, transitioning to jobs. So there's a lot of things in flux. I go to my wife, and this is a very, very, very real thing in America where I said, honey, I don't have health insurance. you have health insurance, and we need to get married. So if I do have something serious, it gets covered. She said, okay, let's get married as quick as possible. So we gave ourselves a month to get a wedding all together. We decided to do it at our house because we figured if we're going to be putting in money into a wedding, might as well improve the house.
Hmm.
So within a 4 week span, we had to pressure wash everything. We had to repaint. We had to get a new roof on the house. Like it was a big ordeal. And
Hmm.
during this time, I was like unbelievably stressed. And
Hmm.
as we're gearing up for the wedding, everything gets set. Everything's great. So it's the day before our wedding. Family's in town. We're at a local bar. I'm the designated driver. I start to herd all my friends back into the car like drunken cats. Like, come on, get in
Right,
the car.
right,
Come on.
right.
Um, as I get into the car, my best man's in the shotgun, just talking away. He just keeps talking. I'm like, "Oh, is everyone in the car?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "All right, cool." I put the car into drive and I ran over my wife's foot the day before our wedding. So, all right, to be fair, I pinned her foot down because there was a conversation where she said, "You're on my foot." And I said,
Right,
"No, there's no way." And she goes,
right,
"Get off my foot." And then we're going back and forth. I'm like, "Do I go forward or do I go back? I don't know."
right.
Oh, so we end up going backwards for everyone that's wondering. And I go to her and I said, "Okay, let's start doing some orthopedic testing. Let's see what's going on." And so her foot was moving okay, but there's already swelling. So I was like, okay, it might be broken. She said, well, I'm going through with the wedding. I'm not going to get some type of medical service.
Right.
Checking pulses. I'm like, okay, let's do it. We go through the wedding. It's one of the most beautiful days of my life. It was amazing. But then we had to go get medical treatment. She ends up getting a very rare syndrome called compartment syndrome, where the area that was crushed, the muscles swell to a point that everything past that swelling point no longer gets blood flow. So we're running the risk of permanent nerve damage in her foot. That was very scary. So she had to get emergency surgery. We had to spend a week in the hospital, and then she was unable to go to school, like her work. She works at a school because of that. And because she wasn't there long enough, she didn't actually get any type of paid leave. So back to the finances again, right?
Mm,
So now I'm working my in-person job. I'm working the online job that they're both like they were starting up at the time, right?
mm,
She didn't have pay. And then I'm also being her caretaker, bringing her
mm,
to and from the bedroom to the shower, getting her food, all these things. I've never been so stressed and so just worn out that if I didn't take the time to like check in with myself, it would have been really bad. And the reason why I bring it up in this way is just because like I think I put up a front very easily and I can bear a lot of things. And I think that until that point where I was really pushed to the edge, I think I would have been very good at dodging the hard questions. I
mm,
think I would have been very good at never addressing some of the big rooted problems in my life. So even though your podcast is like these little moments, this
mhm,
was a big moment, right?
mhm,
But I think that's what it took for me to actually get to be okay with sitting down and really exploring what's going on inside my head, you
mhm.
know?
Yeah, dude, I appreciate you sharing that. And
Yeah.
isn't it amazing? Because in that moment, it's the most stressful thing you could ever perceive, right? Like
Yep.
getting married is stressful enough, right? Starting a business is stressful enough, right? Like, yeah, crushing your wife's foot to that and then like having crazy shit. But it's amazing because in that moment, you're in the thick of it, right? You have no idea how your business is going to do. You have no idea, about insurance or money or financiers or like your relationship or anything like that. And then a year later, you're here. You have success in multiple areas. Your wife's foot, I imagine, is okay now, right?
It's okay, everybody.
It's okay. She's back at work, I imagine, right? Or doing
Yep.
something she loves, and you made it through, right?
Yep.
I think that's a prime example to the question you asked about like what is a goal that everybody can have with mental health is make it through, right?
Like
Like
that.
that is exactly what you did because you had no idea everything you were just about to gain on the other side of the hardest shit of your life. You could
Mhm.
only measure everything you were losing, right? So I think that's a beautiful, beautiful like little moment that you shared, and I appreciate you sharing that because that is vulnerability, right? And admitting all these things and sharing all these things. And I think that is going to make a major impact on anybody who's listening to this. Is like you can literally run your wife's foot over the day before her wedding, your wedding, and make it through a year later on the other side, and both of you better because of it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the things we can never imagine we'd pull from it. So I love that. I love that. My last question for you is where can people find you?
Oh yeah. So if anybody's looking to find me on Instagram, it's the only Instagram handle that was available to me. It's bs.parker. Don't ask what the S is about. It was the only way I can get b.parker in one line.
Bullshit, Parker.
Exactly, exactly. So I had that. I have a podcast, the Revival Method Podcast. Yeah, it's the Revival Method Podcast. I changed the name a couple times, but
hmm
I actually have one recently with Ryan here. I think everyone should listen to.
hmm
And then, yeah, that's basically the two spots you're gonna find me.
Yeah, I love that. And thank you, buddy, for being on this podcast. And we're gonna have to get together in real life because I think
I
we're best
agree.
buds.
Want to do karate out in the
I
garage?
love, of course I do. But yeah, dude, I appreciate you being on and sharing your knowledge and being vulnerable. Like I said, I think anybody listening can pull that away and feel that. So I appreciate you. Everybody listening, make sure you go check out bs.parker, b.s.parker. You know where he is. Find him there. And thank you again, buddy. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out, guys.